programs that used to be we're like a family. And I love the fact that people in these research and then they begin to feel like they're working. And that someone said, they're not going to judge them. No, it's not. And, he's a sharp people back. He's done this thing, and now he can work with it. That level of being okay. I mean, it's not that not working, but they understand that that's true. So they do lots of hugs, lots of eyeballs. They are an element of it. Influencing, cherry picking, super real. But my first 4 or 5 years, all my meds were donated by
Good evening. I'm Melissa Karen. I'm the director of the Mudd Center for Ethics, and it's a joy to welcome you all this evening. This is the culminating lecture for the year-long series that we've had entitled How We Live and Die, Stories, Values, and Communities. And that whole series was really focused on medical ethics. So this evening, our speaker is Dr. Jim Withers. He's a physician and founder of the Street Medicine Institute. He started this initiative in 1992 under a different name called Mercy's Operation Safety Net in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania. And then in 2008, the name shifted to the Street Medicine Institute. Under both names, it doesn't matter which one you use, it's important to understand that he's offering a radical and high-impact practice focused on providing medical care to unsheltered individuals. His work is a prime example of applied ethics, born out of the guiding principles of medical ethics. And there are four primary principles of medical ethics: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. In many ways, Dr. Withers' life's work has been an embodiment of these four principles. I was first introduced to Dr. Withers' extraordinary work by Marissa Charley, who is the director of the Bonner Program here and associate director of the Shepherd Program for Poverty and Human Capability. Marissa set up a meeting with me in September, just this past September, and I'll tell you, by that point, in September, the Mudd Center had already finalized our slate of speakers, the arc of the program, related to medical ethics, how we live and die. But Marissa and I had a chat in the office, and only as Marissa Charley can do, she said, listen, you need to know about this man and what he has done in terms of social justice and medicine and accessing medical care for everyone. She had my attention, and she went on to say it started locally, it went on regionally, it became a national movement, and it is international with nearly 2,000 sites that recognize and associate as Street Medicine Institute as part of that operation. So she had my attention, and I then started looking into this, and I realized that Dr. Withers' voice and his work and his model and example was the perfect culminating experience for this year's program. We're happy to have him here. He was here all day speaking with students. And I'll say that speaking in a small liberal arts environment, not everyone is used to that. I mean, you're really up close with people. And for him, this was a natural extension and something that was very comfortable for him as he got his undergraduate degree at Haverford up in Pennsylvania. And his doctoral degree he received from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. He has received numerous accolades and awards recognizing him for the work he has done both nationally and internationally. And my favorite of these is the I'm so sorry to do this to you, Dr. Jim Withers Day in the city of Pittsburgh. That's the best. But another very important one was in 2015, the CNN Top 10 Heroes Award, which really was a game changer for him in terms of gaining great visibility for his work. As I said, he spent a lot of time with students today, and he spent time talking, listening, and really dreaming with our students, thinking with them about what it means to rehumanize the medical field, what it means to counter moral injury in medical training, and what it means to offer care to everyone, even at the margins. Before Jim comes up to give this long-awaited talk, I just wanted to share with you a 5-minute snippet that Jim Goodwin was kind enough to create from a 2008 documentary on Dr. Withers' work. It's called From One Bridge to the Other. This gives you a sense, while we can kind of conceptualize what it means to do work on the street within communities that are unsheltered. I'm sure we can all imagine that. There's something in the day-to-day practice that this documentary encapsulates for us. You get the feel of it. You understand how relational that practice is and how you have to build trust in order to practice with people who are willing to extend their trust to you. So let me
First, they thought I was probably an undercover drug agent. In fact, they told me they thought I was. But over time, just consistency, and that we're going to be confidential. We're not going to mess with people's autonomy and their privacy. Then we've been embraced by this area. Any pain down in here?
Not that much.
Right there?
Because some of us don't like going to the hospitals, you know, because we go to the hospital, we think we get a bad deal because the first thing they do, they look at our arms and stuff, say, oh, they drug addicts, you know, so that's how we feel, you know, why should we treat them? They're killing themselves, you know, but it's more comfortable coming here, you know, because they treat you with kind of like some respect or whatever.
If you can get back into the VA system and you have any loose ends that you want us to help you cover, you know where to find us, right? Back in 1992, there were no rules at all for how to do street medicine, or there wasn't even a name for it. Here's Pittsburg, lovely Pittsburg. Very quickly, I developed a sort of a practice from one bridge to the next and one alley to the next, referrals, so to speak.
14 years of going around in circles. That doesn't make much sense.
Can you see out of that eye okay? Yeah, pretty good? Okay. The street work is really where the heart of it is for me. Frankly, we've been so stuck in the hospital or the clinics that this is almost like the frontier.
About 10 o'clock at night, man, he used to come over and start kicking me in the face and stuff.
My husband said his ribs hurt up every day.
Yeah.
His eye is all red, and he got a big swollen lip.
Yeah, well,
And his ribs, after kicked him. I wish to God I knew who he was, but I don't.
Here's another inhaler. And then this is the medicine. Okay, open your mouth. Breathe. You been breaking out in a sweat or anything like that?
yeah,
They tell you we were looking for you, huh?
yeah.
Got kind of worried about you last night. It's dangerous and it's difficult to get really close to people, but it's so central to why we even do medicine.
Very limited.
If we were to go up there, is there a medical center that we would connect with? I envision my career evolving as it has so that we have more of a collective commitment to working with the people in the streets to bring them not just medical care, but social justice.
He lives in this bus station?
For the time being, yeah, but things have come to a sort of a crisis point, I guess.
This man has been living across the street from me for about 2 months now, in all weather. He always has a heavy coat on. I feel sorry for him, but he is surrounded by bags and things that are really an eyesore.
Hey, Paul.
I knew sitting on a bus stop would piss so many people off so quick. Apparently people made phone call. I don't know.
I think they're going to ask you about me being here, so I don't know if
It's bigger.
It is much bigger.
Much bigger.
I didn't even check it.
I think a lot of the people blame us for being out here. After the mills went down, they didn't. I mean, everybody was sympathetic at first, but nobody replaced it with anything. It happened all over the country, but I think it was worse for Pennsylvania because we had this huge blue-collar class and just got decimated.
So someone talked to you about moving?
Yeah, the cleanup guys. And I guess they're getting phone calls and stuff. I threw out a bunch of stuff today, and I'm probably going to have to...
Well, what happened today, Paul, just before I came down here, was I got a call from the guy that's in charge of all that. So what I did, and I wanted to run this past you, okay? I talked to Linda. She's our administrator.
Mm-hmm.
She would like to meet you Thursday, and we will get you into housing if you want.
Okay.
It's called Spectrum Housing, and it's a new program that we actually run. But a lot of this just has to do with gravity.
Yeah, when I sleep here, I keep bending my legs it's not helping me.
This probably is just going to keep getting worse, over time. The longer it stays swelled, the more unlikely it is to bounce back.
So how you been doing, Doc?
Good, how are you?
Oh, man.
You look like you're taking a little better care of yourself.
do it?
Yeah, it's hard also for folks on the street to open up that much, to let you know they have feelings, because they've learned to protect their feelings, to not expect too much, to not really trust.
Please help me welcome Dr. Jim Withers.
Oh, I need glasses. Well, thank you for having me here. It is a great honor. I don't know if you mentioned, my brother went to Washington, D.C., so I bought him one of those W&L things, T-shirts, to take home. And I did visit here a long time ago, but I have so much respect for your school, the Center for Ethics, and I'm grateful to be invited. And I was fascinated to see the Poverty Studies group and how focused you all are on digging deeper and understanding the social issues that affect us all, and especially the most marginalized. So here we go. First of all, I have to say, I love being a physician. And I love the legacy of healing to the degree at which I can be part of it, which is ancient and sacred. But as a doctor, I have to diagnose the healthcare industry in the United States is not healthy. There are significant structural problems, and I'll get into those in a minute. But the reason I feel like I know about that that diagnosis, the problem, is because of I had prior experience with my dad, who was a family medicine doctor in rural Pennsylvania, and I made house calls with him, and up in the hollers of, near where I lived. And it was going into those houses with him and watching him not just treat people, but express his commitment and love to them, and see that love returned, that gave me a sense of what healthcare and healing and relationship were all about. My mom was a nurse. We, as a family, we went to Nicaragua and Guatemala and St. Lucia when I was a teenager, and we worked. So all these things gave me a sense of, excitement and a great desire to be a physician. So much so that when I got to med school, I was so jazzed up, I got the highest score on the first test. But it was all kind of downhill after that. But it's still a great privilege to be there and to learn the things that we've learned about the human body and everything else. I was a bit overwhelmed by it all, especially when I got into the clinical parts of healthcare. The technology, we were doing the first liver transplants right there in Pittsburgh when I was there. HIV hit right when I was finishing med school, and that was something. But it didn't take me long to sort of feel like, where am I? This is not what I was expecting. And the fact that it's a giant industry, I think, was setting in on me. That it has its own culture, it has its own motivations, it has its own spoken and unspoken rules. So much of my experience was based on competitiveness, of people trying to get ahead of each other in the learning process, understanding the technology, and the just the forces that were almost never focused really on the humans that we were treating, and that surprised me. And then as I delved into it more deeply, or experienced it more deeply, it wasn't just the structures. There was a culture that I didn't expect, which is one in which white males had the power, in which we wore the white coats and we spoke the Latin terms, and we gathered around people's beds in our coats and talked at them or about them. I saw other examples of people that were trying to humanize the situation, but for the most part, the people were not that important.
the industry was important and getting them through faster. And then I began to understand the people that were definitely suffering the most were the ones that didn't look like me and didn't have the same backgrounds as me. People of color, people who had lower economic circumstances, women, and all the folks that didn't neatly fit into our boxes were indirectly sort of punished. We had labels for folks that were very demeaning. There's a book I don't totally recommend, but it really gets at its House of God, if anyone's old enough to remember that, in which it clearly gives you a sense of that culture. And so this hidden curriculum about us and them, nothing to see here, the patient's the problem. They're not compliant. They're not cooperating with what we want. That confused me. And I didn't like the culture I was in. I remember in one of my rotations at Children's Hospital, there was a little girl, she was 8 years old. Her name was Akiba. And I'd been there 2 days. And they were having a special noon lecture about her because people were getting too close to her. And it was on professional distance. So I sat in there and I listened, and I was sold on it, man. Professional distance is really important. You know, we have to make these boundaries, we have to keep them. And I was converted for a moment. And I went out in the hall, but I didn't know what Akiba looked like. And this lovely little girl came up to me and she said, "I know where we can steal popsicles." And I said, "Great." So we went into the back room and we were licking our popsicles. And she said, "What's your name?" I said, "Jim." And I said, "What's yours?" And she said, "Akiba." And I was like, "No." So I actually had to make a choice, you know, at that point. But I was already done. She had stolen my heart already. She was 8 years old, leukemia for 4 of those 8 years. We got closer and closer. She went through a lot of pain and suffering. She missed her dad. Sometimes she said he was in prison. They let him come once in chains. It was such a traumatic thing to see. And I just followed. I mean, we'd go down for snacks in the little thing in the first floor, and her IV pole would go nuts, and I would like panic, and she would go and fix it. And later, when I came back after I finished the rotation, I was one of only 2 people that she would allow to hold her as she was slowly dying. So it really carved a deep place in my heart. And I'm so grateful for Akiba because I paid the price, but I also understood that you can't back away from people who are suffering. You have to go towards the pain. But I found myself later in my residency, et cetera, trying to teach, trying to humanize, trying to bring the house call into the hospital. And it was almost impossible. Even very good people are stuck in a system that dehumanizes not just the people, but us too. We become the agents of that oppression. And I was trapped. I just wanted to think about being trapped in a place that's dehumanizing and you're part of it. You're an agent of that, of re-traumatizing and oppressing. Even though we're treating people, we're still not helping them heal. And many times we're sending them messages that they don't matter. It came to a head when a patient came up from the ICU to my service. He had been on the streets homeless for a long time. And he immediately, it was a big snowstorm coming, it was freezing outside. And he said, "Doc, I gotta leave." And I tried to talk him out of it, and I couldn't. And he left. And then I learned that he froze to death. And my inability to reach him really convicted me. You know, there was a gap in reality between him and me that I wished I could have crossed. I wished I could have connected with him. And instead of blaming him, like is our standard operating procedure, I was looking at myself critically and saying, where did I screw up? Like, what could I have done better? How can we not have this happen? And then I heard, people joking about such folks, what do you call a frozen homeless guy? A bumsicle, ha ha ha. And that attitude made me angry, made me sad, and then it made me determined that I needed to find a new classroom where I wasn't the powerful guy in the white coat. I wasn't embedded in the structure, and maybe I could take my students there. So I was looking for this new classroom, and that poor, unfortunate guy gave me the lead. And I thought, maybe the answers I need, the classroom I need, is under the bridges of my own city. So, kind of a weird moment, and you guys may face these. Familiar with the Hero's Quest or Lord of the Rings, or whatever. There's a time when you're called to go beyond where you're at, and you have to decide if you're going to answer the call. One of my favorite authors, Dr. Abraham Verghese, wrote a great book, My Own Country, in which he did essentially the same thing in the early days of going and getting to know the HIV population at the time. And you'll have a lot of people that say, you'll shoot your eye out. Those people, you're wasting your time. So I didn't tell too many people. In fact, I didn't tell almost anybody. I found a guy who used to be homeless, and he began taking me out. And so I began sneaking out, kind of dressed like a homeless person in the beginning, and took off my coat, hopefully took off my prejudices, took off my assumptions, and I really wanted to start fresh, just as Jim, the guy helping Mike carry some blankets. And those were really, really amazing days. I still love my work in this as deeply, but I was really out of my league. And I began to see things. I began to see people that were curled up next to dumpsters, kids that had run away, older people with mental illness who were picking out of garbage cans. One guy named Grandpa, who was one of my great teachers out there, had maggots in his leg. And I felt so powerless. They couldn't or wouldn't go for health care. And so just, again, maybe sit a moment and think about yourself in the wilderness, basically. Right in the shadow of some of the biggest medical centers in the world, right there. But ultimately, you might as well be on another planet as far as access to care or helping people navigate that. And so I had to just begin to shut up and listen and listen and listen and respect. And that's how that journey began. I remember there was a guy down by the riverbank as I began to actually do medical care. Let me know if my time is running out. And I was doing wound care. It was becoming normal for me to just start doing it. And that's when they started calling me Doc Jim. And they'd rather die than go to the hospital because of the way they've been treated or the fears that they had. And a lot of times it was associated with being re-traumatized. Sometimes it was, addictions, and no one was going to give them the medicine or whatever that would help them get through that. So they weren't going to do it. But as much as they hated the health system, they loved me. I was not ready for that level of love. They were so grateful, cried, hugged me. And I remember taking care of a guy on the riverbank, and a guy across the campfire there just started sobbing. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I can't believe somebody cares that we are still alive." It was so vivid to me to see the level of otherness and exclusion and hopelessness that was just normal. And that was just so wrong. So I did, I started getting nurses that volunteered with me, and pretty soon we were We were practicing medicine and we were keeping records, and pretty soon we had a program called Operation Safety Net. But the lessons that I began to learn on the street were I think apply and can maybe inform healthcare otherwise, but I could only learn them by going to the people who were most excluded. A lot of the work that you do is just respecting people who've had no respect. And sometimes the guy particularly who looks like he's acting like the last thing you want to do is give him respect. That's the one who needs it the most. Okay. I don't think this is going to cure me, but thanks. It might help. That going towards someone in pain and listening without assumptions, without taking more power from them, that's really the platform in the beginning of healing. It's counterintuitive to power and control systems, but it's the way that you have to start if you really want to get to the starting point. People have a coal, a little tinder of flame that's keeping them from jumping off a bridge, keeping them from totally giving up, enduring hell. And it's something that you need to honor and acknowledge and give respect to, and the feelings and thoughts. And then you begin getting permission to be part of their lives. And what I love is seeing that little flame begin to grow. And one woman said, you know, they just loved me until I loved myself. And with someone, seeing them regain a sense of their own value, regain a sense of agency for themselves, and then the feeling that there's a bunch of people now part of the community that aren't going to judge them, you know, that are just cool with who you are at that moment. That becomes like a really strong launching place for someone to begin to take their lives back. I've seen that with domestic violence work that I've done and other things, but on the street, you watch it happen, and it's miraculous. And it's hopeless, you know, if you're on the outside, but when you're woven into the fabric, you see how people are stronger than they look and how they can become the authors of their own lives. And I love being part of that. And so the other thing I found is that as I was welcomed into the community, I had to figure out, well, who am I? What's a street doctor? What's that? Which I had to explain to the police. You know, I had to explain to a bunch of people. And then I really had to explain to myself, because I knew who I was when I was Dr. Withers' medical staff, you know, Department of Medicine in the hospital. But what's a street doctor? So that's part of the journey, the quest, you know. You find yourself in the wilderness, and you can see stuff that no one else can see. And you've gained trust and solidarity with people. And then what do you do with it? And that's where I think the street medicine experience has the most to teach us. It's very similar to the work of Paulo Freire and others who help people take their power back. But you become a different, like my dad. You're there, and you love people. You're with them throughout whatever they're going to do. And if they get into housing, you celebrate it. If they say, screw this, and they end up back on the bridge, you're there. And so that kind of consistency in someone's life makes them realize, wow, maybe this world isn't quite so bad as I thought it was. So we began then to advocate for people, to fight for their rights. And you start off with just little things like, don't treat that person this way. Or, yes, this person deserves care, and I brought you to them. And so the ability to speak up with the confidence of being, you know, a physician or whatever, means so much your friend, your brother or sister who's with you. And together you begin to say, we're not going to put up with this kind of treatment anymore. And then you have to listen to the people in the system and let them tell you why they're frustrated or what they're doing right, compliment them as appropriate for their hard work. And you become a force of community building and even reconciliation. But the only way you can do that is going out, committing yourself radically to the folks out there, and then with them, and they are always the primary consideration. With them, come back and see how far we can get to fixing it all. So that's the street medicine journey in a nutshell. I remember George, who was this guy that lived under one of the bridges, and he was a Vietnam vet, tough as nails. He was packing somewhere, had a gun. We used to use him to sort of initiate people to like, can you put up with, can you deal with George getting in your face telling you how life is out here? Because he was a bit scary. But then he really loved and respected our team and us. And I learned so much from him. One night, he took me aside. I thought I knew George, African-American, bipolar disorder, Vietnam vet, came out of poverty, drank too much. And he said, Doc, I think I need to tell you something. So he took me away from the other guys because I don't think he wanted to look like he was vulnerable or whatever. So he kind of made it look like he was going to scold me for something. So we went around the corner, and he said, when we were kids, my mother gathered us around in the living room, and she put a gun in her mouth, and she blew her head off. And we didn't know what to do. So we got her into bed, and we tried to make her look okay until a grown-up came. And then he asked about McDonald's gift certificates or something, and how Skeeter was doing. And, he just showed me, and then he closed it up. But it was such a deep level of trust to share who he really was to me. And so you bond, and you understand that there are layers that you'll never see, but that the trust leads you there. Another funny George story, later on, he came out from under the bridge, and his arm was broken. And it was like this way, terrible. And he comes out, and I'm looking at this arm, and he says, Doc, you got something for a cold? I said, yeah, but what about this arm? He says, I'm not going to Blanky Bank ER. I was in Nam. I can deal, yada, yada. I'll be all right. I don't need their crap. And so I gave him his cold medicine. I used a SAM splint called to stabilize the arm. And I went home, and I was like, what am I going to do? So in those days, I had two cars. I had my Mother Teresa car, which was a 3-cylinder Geo Metro. Bumper sticker said, live simply so that others may simply live. So that was my little saintly car. And then I had this used red Alfa Romeo convertible that was pretty hot. And I thought, this is a job for the Alfa. So I put a blanket on, drove down in the morning, toot toot. George comes out, it's a nice ride. I said, let's go. So he just hopped in, no questions, and we just drove around. It was a nice day. And finally he said, all right, this really hurts. Let's go to the ER. And so we got there, and sure enough, they treated him poorly, and he responded. But we were able to get him through, and he got a cast in his arm, and we got him home. So that's the kind of stuff you do. Running out of time? Okay. And so we begin to feel like we're more than just providers. We're sisters and brothers, really. And that's the way street medicine allows you to feel. And we can't say we claim, lived experience status. Most of us, some have. The student in that film that was doing the legs, she had been homeless as a child. So, there's a lot of that more than you'd think. But but then you begin to kind of like lighten up and fight back. And one night, we were waiting for a med student. It was pouring down cold, freezing rain. And we were waiting for the students, so we were inside, and there was customers, and then there was homeless people. And the manager hated the homeless people. And so one guy we called Moses came in, and he was coughing, and I went over and slid my stethoscope under the layers and listened, and he had bronchitis. So the manager came out and started yelling at me, saying, "This isn't a blankety-blank clinic. Do you want to call an ambulance?" I said, "No, I'm sorry, sir." I gave him the medicine, sat down. And then police cars started pulling up, 3 of them. And you could see them through the window and the lights going. And they come in, and the manager goes, "That one, those 2, that one, that one." And so all the people that looked homeless, including Mike and me, we got put out in the cold rain. And I felt horrible because I had gotten all these people tossed out. And then I got this idea. And I went across the street, and I withdrew the maximum. It might have been $300. And I marched back in, and I threw it on the table, and I said, "I'll have $300 of McDonald's gift certificates for the homeless." And they were like, "What?" I said, "The people you just threw out." So they quickly counted out these $5 booklets, and I got them, and I went out and waved at Mike and said, he goes, "Oh, okay." So he took us out, and we found the stinkiest guys, the smelliest guys, like that you can imagine. And I said, here's $10, but you have to spend it at the McDonald's on Wood Street. And they said, "We'll do it for you, Doc." And pretty soon there was this army of paying customers showing up there. So I just say that to say that I've had more belly laughs in the street, stuff I probably couldn't tell you about. That's really funny. But it's been a rich experience, and I've been enormously honored and privileged to be invited into the lives of people and share their journey. To kind of take this to the end here, as was stated, what started as just me doing a crazy thing became a movement. And there was a doctor I met in Calcutta after I'd been at this for about 2 years. First other person I ever saw doing medical work on the street, Dr. Prager. And at that point I said, this is like a fire department. Everybody needs one of these. And that encouraged me to say, I'm going to dedicate my life to speaking to whoever, to trying to make this a thing, because this is a hole. And the only reason it's not filled is because we don't value the people that are suffering and dying at 10 times the rate of the general population out there. And so that's been my obsession. And as it grew, I got an opportunity to get funding, and I decided what I would do is I would have a meeting where my heroes from other parts of the country around the world would come together. We would have a meeting to talk about what we do. Because every time you meet someone that was starting to do it, they felt completely alone in their own city. Or as one of my former students say, hated by proxy. Because you're working with them, you're no good either. And so being validated with each other was really important. It was one of those Forrest Gump moments where it just was the right thing to do. And it became an annual meeting. And it became the heartbeat of a movement, particularly the students that came. They began to infuse those meetings. They began to start their own programs. Students that I had went on to start multiple street medicine programs. A couple of them are inventing the field of street psychiatry now. They're way smarter than me. But being validated at the right moment, that you're not crazy for caring, which is what I'm trying to tell you guys, keep following it. That's really important, and amazing things can happen. So the annual meeting then led to an institute, the Street Medicine Institute, which is a separate nonprofit, and then regional conferences, not just ours. There's annual meetings now, Street Medicine Symposium in California, Texas, Michigan, Connecticut. I think now they're doing one in St. Louis, Brazil, India, and Ireland. So there's more programs I found from you guys than I had any idea. But it's a global movement. And that's super exciting, isn't it? people who are Christian, people who are Muslim, people who are Hindu, people who are Buddhist, people who are atheist, whatever, they have this profound sense of their own significance in life relates to going and working with their own folks on the street. So it's not like we're parachuting in to treat people. It's a grassroots movement where people know they're not alone so that they can do it the way it should be done in Nigeria or wherever. And that gives me chills, really gives me chills. So that genie's out of the bottle, and now we're trying to manage it. We have a street medicine fellowship. We had the first one in my hospital. It's not quite cardiology yet, but it's a non-accredited fellowship. There's another one in Fort Worth, and another one popping up in Detroit. And now we're working on collective advocacy movements. We've had legislation to affect change. The billing, like we could never bill. And you say, well, why do you need to bill? But the reason that we needed to bill is because the people deserve health care that can come to them, and they deserve Medicaid to cover that. Not have to go someplace with a billing code. And so we advocated, the breakthrough was in California, then Pennsylvania and Texas and Hawaii. And then suddenly in Washington, D.C., October of 2023, they said, okay, street medicine, it's a thing. It's just a name I made up, but it's a thing. And a billing code, point of service 27, now you can bill for it. And to me, that's great because it makes the people themselves real and their circumstances real. We're working on a lot of ethical issues right now, especially the guys in California, making it immediate that if you're documented to be living on the street, you're eligible for Medicaid. Now, we'll see where the administration that we have now goes with this till they catch up with us. But we'll see how that works out. But the important thing is that you can be Republican or Democrat or whatever, and you should care about the people that are dying, My background's Christian. To me, my faith has led me to say it's kind of normal to go see people who are suffering and dying out there. It's not, treasonous. It's not whatever. And it's healthy. It's healthy for the people that do it. It's healthy for people that receive it. So, my final argument to people is we're having more fun than you are, We're out there and we're loving each other, and the volunteers will change their whole lives just to keep doing it. We had one young woman who had a temporary problem with her legs, and she was in a wheelchair, visiting people on the street, providing medical care. So it's really, really powerful. In summary, I've told you my journey. I've told you my quest, if you will. I'm not pushing that you all become street clinicians or whatever, but I do feel that you're already on this path, but there are people who are excluded, who are not considered us. And you'll whatever you get into, you'll see that that's the case. There's the good ones and the bad ones. And I want you to think about when they tell you those people aren't worth it, that's not our problem. They brought it on themselves. You can't help that kind of person, whatever. Don't buy that. Because that's an uninformed push away that's lame and never fixes anything either. I encourage you to trust your gut, trust your curiosity, and go towards the pain. Go to the people, as we say. And it's by going towards what is hurting and who's hurting that you're going to unlock the things that you need to actually understand and solve problems. I have a fellow or a resident right now, came all the way up from New Mexico to work with me. He's an ER resident. And he said something this week which spoke to this. He said, you know, I learned that if I can see one person, truly see them, listen to them, then I can see anybody. And I would encourage you to think that way. It's great to categorize and organize, but it's the sacredness of that individual that's going to unlock an understanding of not just who they are, but who you are. So I'm ready for questions.
If you have questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. We need you to have the mic as you answer or ask the question, just so that the video will be able to take it up.
Should I stand? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I really admire the work that you do. I'm interested in social determinants of health, and I think the experience of being unhoused is a big part of that. I'm curious how, from a broader perspective, like, one, what is the model? Like, how do you guys get funding for what you do? And then how can other hospitals be a part of making that change?
Yeah. So right now, still, there's no plug-in for street medicine. It's still kind of a grassroots thing. It's almost always started by students or a small, as Margaret Mead said, a small group of people, you know, and they'll make it happen. And then they get permission later, or they find the way to make it work. However, you know, that's beginning to change. Like, I pinched myself because this past year, HRSA is offering street medicine grants, you know, for medical education, for HIV treatment. And I'm saying, hey, that's the name I made up. You know, how could this possibly be? So we're getting to that point where it's kind of getting normalized. But it still, to this point, it tends to be characteristically a limited number of types of stakeholders that are willing to take the risk and do it. Then they have to sell it, maybe, to their university, to their federally qualified health system, to whatever, their hospital, and make it work. And then the best is when the parent organization says, yeah, that's who we are. Let's advertise this. I mean, it's maybe a little cynical, but when they claim it as something that stands for who they are, then you know you've kind of got them. The funding, you know, now with the reimbursement, it helps a little bit. It's not going to fund any program completely, but it does. Sometimes that just helps your parent organization say, good, we can put it on the books that we're doing something. It does tend to pull in grants locally if you know how to work with other agencies in the county, especially because you can collaborate with organizations that can't reach, you know, the HIV population that's under the bridges or the, you know, whatever their interest is. You can be a conduit for others that want to do projects with you. So I think collaboration is really a good strategy. And then you work your way up from that. Typically, it's either a federally qualified health center, increasingly. Sometimes it's an emergency department. A lot of times it's a teaching program, like a residency, family medicine, emergency medicine, internal medicine are most common, psychiatry increasingly. Or a university that the students say, we got to have this. And then a faculty come and pretty soon they've got a program. Each has its own flavor of how deep they are able to do primary care. But it's all moving, because the streets teach you, you end up moving towards trying to do a better and better job. I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah. It's a little bit like guys on the street. You just have to hustle until you make it work.
Hi, my name's Sam Tigner. Sorry if I'm loud. I I just wanted to ask about the, did you face any legal issues early on? Because I know with healthcare, there's a lot of legality in it. And I mean, now that since 2023, that it's become a bill, I'm sure it's changed a little bit, but before that, I mean, at all.
Yeah, there was some planning and some sort of grown-up responsibility that I tried to apply, but there's also like really almost childish faith in doing, like one of my bylines was do the right thing till you get caught, and then try it a different way. I don't quite push that as strong as I used to because I've seen some consequences that you have to plan for what's going to happen. But I don't think if you're waiting for all the lawyers and your staff to say, or your organization say it's okay, it ain't going to happen ever. So you need to, I think the fact that we're now, as far as street medicine, because I'd like to apply this to other arenas that you might do that take the quest, to meet people who aren't being met. So I'd like to think that principles are generalizable, but with street medicine, we're now getting to the point where we know from the law department at Pitt and from all of our surveys that, knock on wood, no one's ever been hurt doing street medicine by a patient. That's bizarre. Like any ER, any day, people are getting punched by patients and stuff. Never. And with the students, I pray all the time that nothing will happen. And no one's ever been sued. Even with all those posters up there, we'll get money for you. So those are like, the p-values on that are ridiculous. It's just like, why? Why has no one been sued? Why has no one been hurt? And I think someone needs to study that. I know that doesn't reassure a lot of universities and others. They still don't believe that this is sane or safe. And it probably isn't entirely, because we're pushing ourselves out. But I think our experience, sometimes the guidebooks and the things that we provide and the consultations that we do, and just the culture has gotten to where we're not jerks out there. And we respect people's space, and we often have people with lived experience as our guides. So there are principles that have kept us safer. But was that even your question? Okay.
Hi, I was wondering what your thoughts were on medicine's role in addressing the issue of homelessness. Do you see it as a street medicine's goal to help reduce homelessness, or is this just
Yeah, it's, I don't know, I wish I had a more eloquent way to say this, but so many times, if you attend to the immediate needs and emotional needs and respect needs of someone, you end up getting progress you never could have gotten. If you honor the human, they begin to blossom and grow and take control of their lives. And if you tell them what they have to do, what the rules are, and we're going to have tough love here, and we're not going to put up with that kind of crap, you'll never get any progress. They'll just, can't do the finger, but they'll just, basically give you the finger. And so that's an interesting paradox of healing and respect. So we haven't, for the time being, most street medicine programs are reducing harm, kind of like harm reduction, keep them from dying, keep them from getting infected, keep things from getting worse if you can. But then once you get a certain level of community and trust and resources, then you begin to do those things. No one else is really doing it. But we got into housing like in 1999 or so. We began getting people into housing. And we were, people were angry at us sometimes for showing up because we were causing homelessness. I saw it. You were giving them sandwiches. You're causing homelessness over here. And And I would say, well, the Sisters of Mercy make those sandwiches, so they're causing homelessness. You know, those sandwiches are so good, people are leaving their houses, aren't they? Anyway, but we began to house people, and we had a heyday. We kind of had to get out of the housing thing for a while after a certain point where the federal HUD required that all housing has to go through a central intake point. So our ability to hustle our own housing was taken away from us. But in the mid-2000s, we were housing, a couple thousand people. And they weren't just your superficial issues. They were people that were profoundly in need. It helped that I had a behavioral health system I worked with, and we could get them into levels. So we had housing that we got someone their first month's rent. We had housing where we visited them frequently. We had housing where behavioral health teams came and worked with them. We had housing where we owned we ran the building, and we had staff in the day. And then finally, above my offices, we had Trail Lanes, which was 24/7 staff that were cleaning up poop, helping people who were dying of cancer, and nobody else would touch them. And so we were committed across the whole spectrum, and we were vacuum cleaning up, people off the street, and still getting scolded by council persons and stuff. But yeah, if you link the things together, you can do a lot more. But for the most part, we're just nurses and doctors, And it's funny how much people say, "Why haven't you fixed homelessness yet?" And I like to say, "Well, why haven't you?" But the peanut gallery loves to criticize. I don't take that as personally as I used to. But I do think we have to think about going upstream, looking at who's becoming homelessness, how do we prevent it? And we're in a position to study that. For the most part, we don't have huge budgets or research staff and stuff, but now we're beginning to combine multiple cities to try to get statistical significance on stuff.
Hi, my question is, I'm kind of wondering if you've seen any positive changes in the treatment of homeless people in the hospitals and the ERs, and what changes you think need to be made, whether that's education or if it's just the general culture in hospitals, or how can all patients be treated equally and not have to go through an experience just to get medical care?
Yeah. Hospitals and first responders and such, they can get better, but then they relapse, and it's because they're stuck in a place where they're on the front lines of all that pain out there, and they don't have the tools to fix it. And people come and they're in pain and they're having their worst day. And, there are racial issues. There's other things that play in. And if we respond, so I have this, I wasn't going to get into it, but I worked with the police a bit earlier on, and I got to understand more about them, because I had this dream that I was behind one of the shopping centers, and I used to dress more like a homeless guy. And in my dream, I was zip tied or whatever, and they were kicking me and laughing because I'd heard these stories. And then they took my wallet out, and they said, "He really is a doctor. We have to get rid of him." And I woke up, I got to talk to the police. I can't let this go. It turned out the resident I had working with me, her dad was the commander or whatever at that number 2, which if anyone knows Hill Street Blues, it was based on the Hill Street there. But so he lined them up, and I went with my tie, very respectful, and I talked to them, and let's say there's 10 of them each shift. I came back and was super respectful, thanked them and respected them, and they knew I was at the hospital that they'd probably go to if they got shot. I think that helped a little bit. But and then I asked them for their advice. In other words, I was kind of trying to use the same respect and empathy that I used on the streets to them. And what I saw was 8 of the 10 started loosening up and saying, "Oh, yeah, you don't know. People call us all the time, and they want us to arrest someone, and they're just homeless. They're not doing anything that wrong." And then the 2 looked at me like they hated me, like I was the devil. I was subverting their understanding of who those people were and how worthless they were. And I think any group that doesn't have a strong role models, and it helps to have regulations, but it also helps to have somebody credible, not way up at the top, but someone a little bit above you who's been there and says, no, this is how we're going to be. We're not going to be jerks. That wastes time. But without that, you got this guy, let's call him Larry. And Larry has been there a little longer, and you come in, and Larry says, let me tell you, don't trust those people and don't trust those people. They're worthless, they're scum, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, I don't know if that's really true or not. And then the encounter, be it in the ER or wherever, you know, we all come in like this, and the person's like, ugh, and they act, and then we react, and pretty soon, yeah, Larry's right. Those people are awful. That guy was really, and all they're doing is they're responding to the trauma of being treated again like that, and everyone gets trapped in this inflammatory process of not being who they could be, and it's not necessary. But it's very hard to back off when you're trying. So there's a paramedic. There was a program in Santa Barbara started by one of my students who used to be homeless too. And Santa Barbara Street Medicine is amazing. One of the things they have is an annual lecture series at UCSB. Jim O'Connell from Boston and I used to go out and speak every year. And after one of my talks, a young woman with a paramedic outfit came up to me. And she said, I think I want to volunteer with these people. I said, that's great, because we don't get first responders, hardly ever. And she said, well, I want you to know I hate the homeless. I can't stand them. We're out there, they MF me. Sometimes they spit right in my face. I'm just trying to do my job. And I hate them. She'd seen my slideshow with all our work. And then she said, I want to work with them like you do. I thought, wow, this woman sees it. She's trying to liberate herself. And I liked her and her honesty. And so I said, yeah, here's Jason, talk to him. And so I came back later that summer to go on street rounds with him. And she runs up in a volunteer shirt, gives me this big hug, and she says, I love these people. But some of the other paramedics are really angry at me because I'm working with them. So that was, I mean, such a perfect example of how, you know, we get trapped. And so I think it's structural a lot of times. The structures are dehumanizing, but they can't do much better than the tools they've got. And it'd be nice if we could humanize them and make ourselves more, I've tried so hard not to use bad words, humane to each other. But that takes a lot of work when you're pushing against frontline anger, trauma, pain, misunderstandings, mistrust, and all that stuff. And that's why going to the people on the street and sitting by the campfire, that's why it works so well. Because I'm not the man. I'm not telling someone what they have to do. They're the man or the woman, and they're telling me what needs to get done from their point of view. And that power inversion, I think, it doesn't occur to people. They try to apply more power. You know, the beatings will continue until morale improves. You know, when you have to step back and let a space for people to be human to each other and just not think you have the answers for someone else, and then let them lead things. So I say that should apply everywhere. But hospitals have a hard time doing that. You can make progress, especially if you have good leadership. What I do is I try to take people on the street with me. And then my former students become, you know, at this point in my hospital, a lot of the, you know, guys in charge of pulmonary or, you know, the woman in charge of endocrine or whatever, they were my students. And they'll say, oh, Dr. Withers, is Mary still out there? You know, so they'll never forget. It only takes a couple visits or even one to never forget that moment that you sat with someone and truly saw them and understood, oh my gosh, I've been hating people I don't even know. So that's why I think the classroom in the streets and similar classrooms, it's not a trivial thing to be in someone else's world, even briefly.
Thank you for being in our world today. This has been a wonderful thing.
Give up. I just know in my heart that you guys are doing and going to do incredible things. You're going to humanize this world more. You're going to demand social justice. And you're going to do it together, which is really, really important. So just keep that going. You know, encourage yourselves, encourage each other. Because the darkness is not as strong as it seems. It's a bullet.